Nice to have you with us this Sunday morning. It's 8:33 with Julie Wong. I'm Sterling Fox. I owe my old friend John Shorthouse an apology. We were talking about the commercial in which the bankruptcy trustee Blair Manton spoke with his radio colleague about COVID divorces, and it was Shorty and Blair. So there you go, John. We talked in July about COVID divorces based on a story that Global News filed called "Divorces Have Increased During the Coronavirus Pandemic, and lawyers are expecting more." We saw this story, picked up the phone, and called Angela Thiele at Lindsay Kenny. Angela is a partner with the firm and is an experienced family lawyer. And we called her in July to see if the story was true, and indeed, were you expecting more? And she said yes. And yes, and Angela is back with us now several months later as the trend apparently has continued as predicted. So we're just catching an update, and we'll join Angela in a moment here. And then in a few more moments, we'll meet another partner at Lindsay Kenny LLP, Cassandra Drake, who has just litigated a very interesting case, a divorce case. So Angela Thiele, first up this morning, welcome back and good morning.
Thanks, Sterling. It's always a pleasure to try to provide some information to people that are listening to your show.
Well, it's great to have you back on the show. It's always fun. Back in July, when we first talked about this, you were saying that you were, I suppose, not surprised by the volume of business, Angela, as much as sort of gearing up for the fact that the volume wasn't going to go away at all.
That's correct. I mean, one of the difficulties we've had through COVID is that the court is struggling to keep up with the people that need the assistance of the court. And COVID has brought out, I think it's fair to say, the best and the worst. People that are reasonable are using alternate dispute resolution. The mediators are working very hard to get people resolved. The counseling profession has been wonderful. I had a very difficult case where a well-known counselor worked through COVID with the family because there was a serious parenting issue that was had to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. But when people can be unreasonable because the courts are closed or restricted, they are unreasonable. And so it's a situation where your tools to help people are restricted, and the type that sort of revels in the fact that we can't get things resolved just continues to be unreasonable.
Right. What is the status? Because when we spoke a few months ago, everything was pretty much shut down, Angela, and almost everything was virtual. You had to Zoom here and there if you needed to get an order of some kind of immediate attention from the court. There were avenues that you could use, but they were really in cases of extreme cases only. Has the situation improved in that regard in terms of access at all?
Well, to some extent. We never could Zoom in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is where you have to be for urgent matters that come up before a trial.
Okay.
So trials ended for about 3 months, and we could only go in for urgent matters, and those had to be on the telephone. And I think most lawyers believe that telephone justice is a little difficult because you have you take longer. You don't have the ability to see the judge's face
right.
as you're trying to argue a matter, so you just sometimes keep talking. And the more complex matters sometimes are hard to get across because the judge is looking at paper that you've filed. You've got the paper you filed on your desk. You can't see whether the judge is at the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's fair to say that our judges are being heroic. But what's happening is that a bunch of lawyers are lining up to be in chambers on the telephone, and there is so much volume that any complex matter we're having difficulty getting it heard. You were sitting on the phone all day long
Sure.
waiting to be heard.
Right.
So that's that's the reason why reasonable people try to use the mediator, but if you have to get something resolved, you really have no choice but to deal with the limited court resources. Recently, the judges have started to, on request, hear matters in person with our COVID courtrooms, sanitized, and I have chosen, whenever possible, a personal appearance, and I think I've had about 4 in the last couple of months, where it's a one issue hearing that you can deal with on a personal basis,
right.
And that is. We're actually getting something resolved. We're not sitting on a phone and waiting. But I think what's also happening in terms of the people that are coming to me, and it's interesting how as people have become unhappy in their marriages, as COVID has worn people down, I find myself very often saying, look, lawyers have a responsibility to try to talk to you about, is there any possibility of reconciliation?
Of course, yeah.
And the grass is absolutely not greener in terms of what you would have to do now to end your marriage. That is, I can't tell you when I can get you into court. Mediators are booked up. The stress, if you have children, on your children of going through both COVID and a divorce at the same time, don't do it. Just wait. That's my general advice, which probably means I'm not opening as many files as other lawyers are, but I think that's the right thing to do.
Sure. Angela, one thing that you have identified in the past to enlighten our listeners is to really talk a little about what the courts have done since the Family Law Act changed in 2013 with respect to third party. You've got the plaintiff and the defendant, the couple, the separating individuals, and either World War III or another avenue of approach. And the mediation process, the consultation process has really been enhanced enormously in the past 7 or 8 years in BC. Is it working, especially now with the limitation of ability to in-person anything? Is the introduction of that huge component of third-party players into the divorce scenario, is it working to the advantage of the people involved?
Absolutely. The mediators and arbitrators in this province did a very quick switch to Zoom if they weren't already using it, and a lot of them were.
Right.
It's actually helping because people are sort of not in the same room, or the sort of same physical place.
Right.
And they have a little bit of time to, think it through when they're on Zoom. It's not for unreasonable people. Being able to have a retired justice mediator, stare them in the face and say, look, you're being unreasonable. You need to settle this. So I was able, there's a couple of mediators that were still doing in-person mediations. One, a retired justice, Justice Lease, did an excellent job for us in about May. We didn't get it settled, but not through lack of trying. Mm-hmm. But that was a family that somebody needed to sort of face-to-face talk to them about, why do you want to carry on with this litigation? You can get this done and it'll be over with. And what is being difficult is that, for example, I had two trials that were supposed to be in April, both close to settlement. One, relatively reasonable people and lawyers carried on and settled and were done. One party moved out, bought another house. Mm-hmm. The family was relocated. The child started going back and forth. They're doing very well. The other one, much to the benefit of one party, my client had money sitting in trust. The other party had already been able to move on and buy a home. We were close. The other party had no interest in settling once the trial date was not staring them in the face.
Right.
We're now looking at a November 2021 trial date. Oh,
for crying out loud.
And in terms of the cost to the family, in both cases, children involved in the middle. And the one person not wanting closure because it's, to her benefit to just be, I'm not going to say mean, but it's like your money's tied up in trust. Interest rates have gone down. Mm-hmm. Great time to buy. I'm going to see if you take a lesser offer because you just want to get this done. And in that particular case, the court really can't help us. We asked for a settlement conference with a judge, which is one of the ways that you can try to get things done. They just don't have the resources right now, because judges are very busy doing the other things that just take more time because they're on the telephone.
Interesting. So, Angela, a final question to you, because I want to talk to Cassandra in a minute. She's been in a recent trial, and I want to zoom in on one of the major reasons for divorce, and this happened to be an argument about whether the kids were going to go back to school in the face of a pandemic or not. Presumably, there were many other issues of division of opinion. But when you just back to something you talked about earlier, the responsibility of the lawyers and the system itself to make sure that every time someone comes banging on the door demanding a divorce, and that SOB is going to get out of my life and I'm going to get my sweet revenge, yada, yada, yada. The responsibility to talk people down from starting a war, one, and two, are you sure? Are you really sure you want to do this? Does that still get asked a lot?
No, I ask it. I think that all of my colleagues in this profession are required to explore the possibilities of reconciliation, but more importantly, to talk about, do you understand what this process is going to do, particularly to your children at a time of COVID? These poor kids are insecure as heck. And to add this, the idea that mom and dad are having a divorce in the middle of it, I just think it's untenable. If I can convince someone to say, and just by saying, look, what's the harm in waiting? When we were first starting in March, it was easy. Through the summer, people started to see this, sort of window, or things are okay. And of course, if they'd started now, they'd be right in the second wave, right when their kids have gone back to school with all that uncertainty. So I think that, a lot of us tried to discourage new files, and sort of say, obviously, this is a time that brings out a lot of uncertainty in a married couple. But think about your children. Now, if someone came to me and said, we've been married 30 years, there's no kids, we want to get a divorce, sure, no problem, let's go. You tried to talk to them a little bit more still about, are you sure you want this? But I wasn't as concerned about a mature couple without children saying, well, this has brought the end to our marriage. But the other thing is that in the judicial system, we have a hearing that is sort of an initial hearing where the judge talks to people about resolution of their affairs, and also talks very much about, have you tried alternate dispute resolution?
Sure.
This looks like a case you could resolve with a mediator. And often I'm saying to people, here's my advice. Here's a list of good mediators. I think your circumstances are such you don't need lawyers to go through the mediation with you, as long as you're getting your advice at key points. And here's a list of really good mediators. And people are getting their matters resolved if they act follow my advice and act in that fashion and go find the mediator.
Oh, good to hear. Good to hear, Angela, because that's why the Act was changed 7 years ago, to introduce that component into the whole system. And it's encouraging to see that it's working, and it's encouraging to see that the system has taken it up as actively as they have. Great to have you back with us. I need to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to just get you to pass the phone over to your partner, Cassandra Drake, because we're going to zoom in on a case that Ms. Drake has handled recently. One of the reasons for divorce that Angela has so elegantly articulated, of course, is the future of the children. And during a pandemic, oh my gosh, unbelievable degrees of stress. Cassandra Drake and more on COVID divorces. Thank you, Angela. We're back after this.
Weekend mornings on 980 CKNW.
Coming up to 8:51, we're talking family law and COVID divorce. We had Angela Thiele, a partner with Lindsay Kenny, on the line for the first portion of the conversation. We finish up with Cassandra Drake, also a partner with Lindsay Kenny LLP, also a family lawyer. Cassandra, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Yes, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Angela was talking about the sort of the generic qualities of the activity level in COVID divorces, and I suppose none of us should be surprised at the fact that nothing has changed. If anything, it's perhaps up a little. But you are with us this morning because of the reason for divorce. A lot of people break up for a million different reasons, a lot of them having to do with the kids. And you have recently handled a case involving parents disputing whether the kids should go back to school during a pandemic or not. Did that end up being the basic reason for the split?
No, that wasn't actually the reason for the split in this particular case. It was a difficult relationship prior to that.
Okay.
There were issues with parenting, certainly, but that particular issue was not the reason for the separation.
Okay, but it was a bone of contention, clearly. Did it get resolved in court?
Yes, it was absolutely a bone of contention, and it certainly did. I was able to address the matter using some case law that had come out of the Ontario courts, but because we actually didn't have any decisions here yet. So I was able to refer the judge here to the case law from Ontario that set out the factors that should be considered, and ultimately the judge here did order that the children should return to in-person schooling.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so clearly one parent was not at all interested in that. The other was. Huge divide. So the judge just had to impose an outcome.
Absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately, in this case, the parties weren't able to resolve it on their own, so the judge did make an order in favor of the father that the children return to school.
Yeah, Angela was extolling the virtues of the mediation component to the family law process that was deliberately altered to include it in 2013. It doesn't solve all the problems, does it, Cassandra? And I guess specifically on matters involving children, I would think would be where the least mediation problems get solved.
Yes, yeah, you're certainly right about that. Mediation is wonderful. We try to mediate all of our files, but sometimes when parents are at loggerheads on certain issues, even a good mediator is not going to be able to get them past it, and that's why we do sometimes have to rely on the courts.
Right, and as far as your access, you just finished a case, clearly a very important case, a pretty intense one as well. How was your access to the process throughout it?
The access was great. I mean, the courts did shut down, as I'm sure Angela spoke about.
Sure, yeah.
But there were processes to address urgent matters. This particular issue of the in-person schooling didn't arise until the courts had actually reopened.
Okay.
So we were able to get access to a judge to hear the matter fairly quickly.
Cassandra, Angela was talking about children, and she said if there's a couple have been married for 30 years, no kids, no entanglements, and they want to get divorced, sure, let's go. If there are children involved, she said her advice would be, please, can we reconsider? Can we wait? Did you happen to notice there's a pandemic going on? In cases of divorce, even though it's frequently complicated, I tend to reserve my sympathies for the children. What would your advice be to parents this morning in that super tense emotional state, contemplating divorce, literally living on a knife's edge, where children are involved? Any thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I always tell clients or potential clients to just put their own feelings aside, as difficult as that can be, especially when it's a long-term relationship like that. As difficult as that can be, put your own emotions aside and do what's best for the kids, because it's ultimately them that suffer throughout this process. And
generally speaking, does that resonate?
I think it does. I mean, not initially sometimes, but I think when people start to realize what impacts the conflict might be having on the kids, most people do come around.
Interesting stuff. Cassandra, thanks for this. It's a timely reminder in an extremely tense and unusual time for families all across Canada. We do appreciate your taking a few moments with us this morning. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Cassandra Drake, a partner, along with Angela Thiele, both joining us from Lindsay Kenny, LLP, on a Sunday morning. We'll take a break for the news. When we come back, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has a few thoughts about How are we going to pay for a debt of $350 billion and climbing? Could it be taxes? We'll talk about it after the news.